Want to know a really simple way to start the backswing? Let's have a look. When I was learning to play my golf, and this dates me a little bit, with a lot of players would start with what they called a one-piece backswing. Now, my young interpretation of that was that everything had to be rigid and everything would work together as a go back. And of course, I've got massive amounts of tension in my body when I'm doing that. When I start the backswing, I do definitely want to feel like it's all, my upper body and my arms and my club are moving together to begin with. My lower body will follow, and that's important that the lower body doesn't lead the backswing movement. But I want it to work in a way that's not creating tension in the swing. So some really key points about how we want the backswing to start. First of all, I'll self-monitor. When I begin my backswing, there's no change in the tension in my arms. Now, sure, the club's sitting on the ground, so I've got to deal with the club not moving, and I've got to get it moving. So I've got to take up the weight of the club or the inertia of the club because it hasn't moved. That's very little work to actually start the swing. I feel like I'm starting the backswing with this sort of combined top half of my upper body, so chest, shoulders, back and arms, with my hands very, very light. So as I begin the backswing, my hands and arms and club are moving back together, or I think of them as moving at the same rate. So again, there's no tension there. The club's not that heavy, and as soon as I've started the motion, the club will easily continue to go. The other thing is if I'm carrying any tension, as I used to in my younger days, that tension is going to generalize through my upper body. So my upper body is going to get tighter. It's going to make it more difficult for me to turn, in which case I'll have to feel like I'm forcing the turn. So as I start my backswing, upper body's moving away, all together. As I continue the movement, then I'll get a little bit of lifting with my arms, my elbows will fold, and my lower body's going to start to turn. If I'm looking at reference points from this view here, the very start of the movement, if I imagine a line sort of resting under the shaft of the club, when I begin the backswing movement, it's like the shaft of my club is staying on that imaginary line. So as I begin my backswing, there's no movement of the club out this way, no lifting of my hands, and no twisting of the club. They're all very, very common things that I'll see every day with players. They're sort of complicating the movement, adding in extra wrist motion during the backswing, which then has to be somehow compensated for in order to hit effective shots. Here's a really simple way of thinking about the backswing. If I'm going to, let's say I'm going to throw the club at my other camera there, I would move the club forward, and as I move my arm back, you can see that the club's already beginning to swing around my arm. Now when I get to about here, I'll let go of the club and off it goes. Now if I have that same feeling of throwing the club toward the camera, and then when my hands get to about hip height, I can switch off the time I would normally actually let go of the club. And now the club's movement has carried my hand and my arm to the top of the swing. So I've got this feeling of almost this throwing motion toward the camera, and that will carry my arms back to the top of the swing. So it's a very big difference between feeling like I'm rigid, taking the club back all in one piece, and then I've got to maybe think about where do I hinge my wrists and how do I hinge my wrists, versus if I feel like I'm throwing the club away from the target, because the club head's going to be moving faster than my arms, it's caused my wrist to hinge. Very big difference and very big distinction between me hinging my wrists and my wrists virtually being hinged by the swinging movement of the club head. We definitely want the second. So as the club goes back, throwing the club toward the camera, and my wrists have hinged. Not only have my wrists hinged, but my elbows hinged as well. So my thought is, what's the direction that I need to throw this club? Do I throw it straight back? Clearly not. You can see that's not on the correct path. Do I swing it around behind me? Clearly not. I want something in between. So I've got this combination of my body rotating, my arms will lift a tiny bit, but again, that's only through the throwing motion. to get the club to travel back on the correct path. So practicing the movement, and if you've got like a diagonal line where you're going to get the club starting back on it. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video there, as the club starts back, it would stay on an imaginary line underneath the shaft of the club at the beginning. It'll move above it at the start, but getting the feel of that movement beginning back, the club's likely to stay on the correct path, provided it feels like this fluid throwing motion. Give that a go and notice and keep the fluidity in your downswing as well.